And we also have a couple of board members. Shelley Clare is here, Shelley, and Bill Beers, our elected school board members here today. And so we've asked Chuck to give us a presentation and leave as much time as he could for questions. And Chuck, it's up to you. If you want to use the mic, we have a couple of microphones.
I have my teacher voice.
Okay. Very cool. Get in the back.
I'm just here to kind of introduce the program. Dan has actually put together a real composite of all of the things that we have acquired from meeting with community members, getting input from community leaders in the format of a PowerPoint presentation. And so we're going to get him to go through that, which is about 20 minutes or so, and then open it up for questions afterwards. So jot your questions down in case something isn't covered in the presentation, and we'll be glad to try to answer those at the end. Maureen is here because at every meeting we collect frequently asked questions, and we have been compiling those, and we are going to publish a community link. I think some of you know what that is. It's a school publication. That will be sent out to every home in the community next week. And in there is all the same information you're going to get today. It's some of the composite with a little bit more explanation and the pamphlet that you have, the tax information, and also we compiled all these frequently asked questions. So we'll try to answer those questions that come up during these meetings for community members that aren't able to attend the meeting in that publication. Just a little contextual background is that referendums have become kind of a way of life for schools in the state of Wisconsin in the last few years. Over the process of just April to November this year, there were 86 referendums in April. There are another 64 referendums this fall in November, and it's primarily because of the way that Dan will explain some of the funding goes on in the state of Wisconsin right now relative to public schools, and a thing called revenue caps. And Sheila, who was on the board before, kind of knows a lot about those kinds of things as well. But Dan is going to try to explain it in a way that everybody understands it. 3 years ago, in 2014, we had a referendum, a 3-year non-recurring referendum. That is running out this year, which is why, as we go into 2017-18 school year, $950,000 of revenue or income is going to go away, cease to exist for the school district. That's the first question that's on the referendum, is the $1.7 million. But it's actually asking you to let us keep the $950,000 that we've been using just to keep things afloat for the last 3 years, and to give us an additional $750,000 in each of the next 5 years while we address some of the things that we've kind of just let slide, and we'll explain all of that to you. But this process started all the way back in 2012 when we did our first community survey. And we asked parents a lot of questions about grade configurations, building use and utilization. Some of you may not even remember that, but we still have all that data and all that information. That's where it started. And in 2014, we did a referendum to stabilize our district financially while we tried to work through some other important issues, including facilities, in order to come back at this particular point in time and present a larger scope, which is what we're talking about with 3 different questions this year. We also did another survey this year. Some of you probably got it and maybe looked at it and said, this is too complicated, but it was for 2 purposes. One is to reestablish where we were in 2012, whether it was still accurate or not accurate in terms of people's viewpoints about grade configurations, etc. And secondarily, to give additional input to the board to say, how do we want to approach this and what questions do we feel are going to be successful if we put it out? Because I will tell you this, you are just as hard at a failed referendum as you do at a successful referendum. You want to do everything you possibly can to put the best foot forward, or the best question forward, or the best answers forward that you can the first time. Because having to go back and regenerate all that energy, all that work, and try to do it all over again is not fun on anybody's part. So that's how we kind of pulled all of this together. We also had a community advisory committee. We invited, by letter, 115 people in this community to sit down with the board, take a look at all the various options, and there were at one point in time 11 different ways that we could look at using our buildings, reconfiguring buildings, remodeling, doing whatever with them, in order to narrow this down to what we eventually came up with 4 possible options. Out of those 4, One was picked by the community committee. The board took that information, took the survey information, sat down and looked at the financial situation of the community and community members and taxpayers and said, all right, what can we do? What do we think will work? What do we don't think will work? And that's where we ended up with, one, the operating referendum for 1.7, replacing the primary school up on the hill, which is a conglomeration of about 5 different buildings stuck together over a process of about 60 years, and maintain and keep the elementary school, which was not the original plan from the advisory committee, but we'll explain a little bit about that if you have questions about it, because it's a pretty solid building. We felt, or at least the board felt, that they put a minimal amount of money into that and get to use it for another 10 or 15 years. And at that point in time, the new building, which we built to be expandable, another board, another point in time, financially, they could decide whether to close that building or not close that building. The gymnasium, which is the third question, came out of a community request and a community need, which is also part of the advisory committee recommendation, to put another gymnasium on this building. And that comes from a need that was expressed by parents that from the time we built this building to where we are right now, youth programs have expanded tremendously in this community. Our school programs have first dibs on being able to use any and all athletic facilities. So you have kids coming in at 5:30 in the morning, you have kids staying here until 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, which impacts community time, or family time. And it also, with young kids, having to practice and then get up the next day, go to school, or whatever else they're going to do. There were a group of people that respected that need and said, you need to at least ask the question about another gym to see if we can relieve some of that and build some family time back into this equation. So the 3 questions, 1.7 million operating, 22 million, 14 million will go into building a new building. The school sites are directly west of here, if I'm pointing in the right direction. On the north side of the road is the Baldwin property. On the south side of the road is the Grossman property. Both of those are being considered right now and looked at, and we're discussing the possible purchase of one of those 2, depending on a couple of different things. 1, we have to have a successful referendum. 2, we have to get permission to purchase it from the community at the annual meeting. So those are the 2 sites that are under consideration. If those first 2, meaning permission and money, become available, then we'll be looking at one of those 2 sites of putting another school directly west of here. Okay? And then the last one, the gymnasium. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan present the information that he has in his PowerPoint, and then there may be some additional questions that we haven't answered, and we'll take time afterwards, along with either of the board members that might have some comments, and hopefully we'll walk out with you and know what and why we're doing this. Dan?
Thanks, Chuck. Everybody hear me okay if I use my teacher voice? All right, good. So what I want to talk about is give you some context as to how we got to where we got. As Chuck said, the board has been wrestling with the question of school funding and school facilities in the Lodi community for 4 years now. I came to the district, I started on August 1st, taking over for Brent Richter, who moved one district over as SOC. But before I was here, I spent 5 years at the Department of Public Instruction. I worked on our school finance team, which is responsible for administering all of our state school aid programs, including the main pot of money, which I'm going to talk about, administering our revenue limit, handling all of our district reporting. So I came into the district with a very strong background in this subject. And the reason that I want to talk about it is because one thing that I think a lot of people don't know is that public education is something that lives in our state's constitution. It's been effective life in Wisconsin since we became a state in 1848. And the state constitution requires that all kids receive a free public education through district schools. That language has been there since day one. The popular opinion of how we fund schools in the state is this. Every kid, the state appropriates a certain amount of money for every kid. Those kids go where they go. The funding goes where they go, and that's the end of it. It's not quite that simple, and I'll talk about why. The way that we fund schools in Wisconsin is largely a partnership between the local property taxpayer and the state government. There are some small shares of funding. The feds pick up about 7% of our school costs, which often surprises people given how involved they are in setting the policies and requirements that we have to follow. And there's 4% that comes from things like student fees and activities, things like that. But the vast majority, 90%, is a combination of property taxes and state aid. It's about a 50-50 split right now. Most of that state aid comes from something called state equalization aid. When we have the big budget conversation here in Wisconsin every 2 years, this is the main pot of money that is the focus of all the legislative discussion, hearings, proposals from the governor, etc. So state equalization aid is the main way that we fund schools. And the formula is really complicated, but the idea is actually really simple. So we have 422 school districts in the state of Wisconsin this year. And each of those districts is in a community with different characteristics. Some communities have a lot of nice lakefront type property. A lot of communities that are more thoroughly, have a greater mix of middle class housing. Some of them have more distressed commercial areas, that type of thing. And if everybody taxed at the same rate, so when we do talk about property taxes, we talk about something called the mill rate, which is your property tax per $1,000 of property value. So if the entire state taxed at the same rate, let's say it was 10 mills, then depending on what kind of district you were in, some districts would raise a lot of money from that. Some districts would not raise very much money from that. The basic idea behind state aid, the reason it's called equalization aid, is that state aid is designed to top you up. So that if you're this district here, you get a lot of state aid. If you're this district here, you get little or no. And every kid has access to roughly the same resources. That's the principle behind how we fund schools in Wisconsin. The reality, of course, is much more complicated. Given my water, because I left it over there. So what drives our state aid as a district? It's a combination of 3 numbers. The first one of those is our property value. And every year, what the State Department of Revenue does is they look at all the communities, all the counties, all the municipalities throughout the state, and looks at how the assessors do their job and all the new assessments they did during the past year, and they come up with what's called an equalized value, meaning that if your community's assessor looks one way and their community's assessor looks another way, they smooth that out to make an apples-to-apples comparison between districts. I just got our updated numbers for this last week from the Department of Revenue, and that is the first piece of the formula, equalized property value. And that's the total for the entire district. The second piece is our local costs. In the law and in school finance world, we call it shared costs, because it is the cost that is shared between the property taxpayer and the state. So those are our locally funded educational costs. That does not include things like federal grants, tuition payments, fee revenue programs. It's just that core educational program that we as a community and the state share. And the final piece is our resident student enrollment. And that word resident is key. Lodi Public Schools funding is based on Lodi Public School residents. Now they may attend school somewhere else through open enrollment or another program, but our resident kids in public school, and in the law this is called membership, that's what determines our funding, who lives in the district. And what we do when we figure out our aid is we divide those out. So we get a property value per kid and a shared cost per kid. And then we go one step further. And this is what makes it so complicated. Is our state aid is based on a comparison between what's going on here in Lodi and what's happening in the rest of the state. So we could make no changes. We could spend exactly the same amount of money every year. Nothing could change in Lodi. And depending on what goes on in the rest of the state, our aid could go up or aid could go down. Of this entire comparison, the one piece that we really have control over is what we spend. All of these other factors either depends on who comes to school and who lives in the district, or what's going on throughout the state. But the one decision that our board has that affects our state aid is how much money we spend. The way that it works, and I won't get into the technical details, but as a summary, is the state looks at how much money you spend per kid, the shared cost. And in this, I've got $12,000, just an example to make the math easier for me to do a graph, but it varies from district to district. And what the state does is they divide this up into levels, 3 levels called 3 tiers. There's this primary tier, which is the first $1,000 a kid, pretty small. This middle tier is called the secondary tier, that is the bulk. It's about $8,900. And then this top tier, everything over this line, is called tertiary tier. And what my friends and colleagues in DPI do every year is they break up every district's cost. And then at each level, every district is aided based on a comparison between your district's property value per kid and the statewide number. So for the bottom level, it's based on our property value per kid compared to $1.9 million. At this top level, it's based on our value per kid compared to the statewide average, which is about $550,000. So that comparison is how much you have to tax. The rest of that is state aid. Now for a district with lower than average property value per kid, and that per kid is just as important as the property value, which we'll talk about in a minute, they get a positive number at all 3 levels. A district with an above average value per kid can actually get what's called negative aid. And this is where Lodi lives. Because our property value per kid is above the state average, we get a negative number. And that actually kind of floats down and eats up our positive aid that we get at this level. So this is why higher property value districts receive less from the state. Now there are some districts that have such high property values and such low enrollments that they get negative numbers at these first 2 levels. Your third level never goes away unless you're so ridiculously high property value, over like $2 million a kid, that you're not getting any aid there. But that's a small population of districts, and that's not really central to this conversation. The main point, and the reason that I go through this, is that our funding from the state is based on the idea that a community's ability to pay for its schools is based on its property value divided by its resident kids. And to give you a really kind of, I think, illustrative comparison, we'll look at Lodi and we'll look at Waunakee. Because Lodi and Waunakee actually spend about the same amount of money per kid. 11,600 versus 11,400, pretty close. So their board aren't making hugely different spending decisions than our board is. But their property value per kid is $130,000 lower than ours. And that's really more on the per kid than it is on the property value. Because one thing Waunakee has going for them is a lot of young families with kids move into Waunakee. So their value is still reasonably high. They've got a lot of new development. They've got some lakefront property. But boy, they have a lot of kids in the bottom of that fraction. And as a result, Lodi actually gets about $1,500 more per kid from the state than we do. Waunakee, excuse me. Thank you. So, based strictly on that property value per kid comparison, that is why there's such a difference between the amount of state support Waunakee gets and the amount of state support we get. Value is what drives our state aid. But that's not the entire picture. One thing to keep in mind is that when politicians and other folks talk about state funding being broken, what they mean is that the formula is set up, it does exactly what it was designed to do. It redistributes state money from property wealthier districts to property poorer districts. The broken part is this idea that that value per kid is how we should fund schools. It doesn't take into account things like individual community poverty, English as a second language, student disabilities, etc. It's just strictly value per kid. So when you hear somebody talking about the way we fund schools in Wisconsin is broken, that's what they mean. But the resources that we have available aren't driven specifically and only by our state aid. The resources we have available are driven by the revenue limit, or some people call it the revenue cap. Now, what the revenue limit is, was something that was started under Governor Tommy Thompson in 1993. And what he and the legislature put into place was something very simple. Every district has a limit between the amount of state aid it gets, state equalization aid, and the amount of property tax they collect. Those two combined make up your revenue limit. And when the system was set up back in 1993, they had a built-in inflationary increase every year. So depending on what the rate of inflation was that year, and what the revenue limit had been the last year, that's how much money per kid extra each district got the following year. And this was true for the first 15 years of the revenue limit. Now, those of you who might have been part of those conversations back then, the revenue limit went hand in hand with something called two-thirds funding, which was that if the state was going to cap total school revenue at a certain level, 2/3 of that would come from the state, 1/3 of that would come from property taxpayers. But the specific mix varied district to district, again, driven a lot by the property value. The revenue limit is one big pot of money. And within that one big pot of money, we get a certain amount of state aid every year. Friday is a big day for people in my world. Friday is the day that I certifies to every district, here's how much state aid you're going to get this year. Once I know that, I know our state aid, I know our revenue limit, I will know our property taxes. Because property taxes are just the revenue limit minus our state aid, minus that money the state gives us so we don't have to tax for it. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times people will talk about putting money into public schools. This year, the state put in $85 million more to general school aid than they did last year. But they didn't touch the revenue limit. So the districts got zero increase in the revenue limit this year, but the state put more money into the aid formula. All that did was provide tax relief. Not one dime of that $85 million in additional general school aid is going into the classroom this year. The only way to put dollars into schools, into classrooms, is to increase the revenue limit. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. What has all this meant here in Lodi? We've had a lot of change in the world of schools and school funding in the past 8 years. So what's been happening here on the ground? As you recall, I said that when the revenue limit was set up, it was set up with a regular inflationary increase every year. So if nothing had changed, I'm sorry, this color scheme is kind of hard to see on this projector. What I've got here is a graph that goes from 2008 all the way up to 2022 beyond this little end here. And it goes from $14 million up to $21 million. So if nothing had changed since 2008, we were at about $15.8 million. We would have gotten an inflationary increase every year, and this year our revenue limit would have been about $18.2 million. Now the first thing that changed was in 2008, when Governor Doyle's final budget broke the link between inflation and the revenue limit. The Great Recession had hit, there was a lot of concern about state funding and property taxes. So instead of an inflationary increase, what we got was a flat $200 per kid increase each year. Then, 2010, Governor Walker was elected, 2010, all that stuff happened. And we saw for the first time a decrease in the revenue limit. Every district got a 5.5% cut in their total revenue they were allowed to collect. Now, part of the stated reason back then was to give districts and other governmental units the tools, as they were called, to deal with this. And like basically every other district in the state, we use those tools by requiring our employees to pick up a portion of the cost of their benefits. So that happened, that's done. Since then, the state has allowed little or no per pupil increase in the revenue line. So it's not like we kind of had that one-time pain and then got to keep up with our costs again. But some of these years have been zeros. Some of them have been $50 a kid, $75 a kid. When you combine that with what our enrollment's been looking like in Lodi, for the past 5 years, we've been on a steady but gradual decline, about 20 to 25 kids a year. Our funding would have been flat and then starting to go down the last couple of years. Now, one thing that the state did is they created this new program, this new funding program called Per Pupil Aid. Per Pupil Aid is just a flat amount of money per kid. This year is $250. It's based on the number of kids that go into our revenue limit, but it lives outside of that. So that's just additional funding we get. It doesn't affect property taxes. It doesn't affect that big pot of state aid. It's just an extra payment that we get. Now it helps, and we've certainly been very glad to have it. We continue to be very glad to have it. But here in Lodi, it's basically meant over the past 5 years, just that per pupil aid and nothing else would have helped us stay. Now fortunately for our schools, the community has been supportive of Lodi schools throughout this period, passing 2 referenda, one in 2008, another one here for the past 3 years. So it has mitigated this impact. So this line has continued to go up and go up. So we've been able to kind of keep up. It hasn't been as drastic as it could have been. Chuck said that $950,000 referendum expires after this year. And if nothing else changes, so nothing changes in the state budget, nothing changes in our enrollment, if I hold all of the other numbers out in the world constant, which is not realistic, obviously, but if nothing changes, our best case scenario is level funding while our costs continue to go up. Realistically, if the enrollment trend continues, this will actually be a bit of a downward trend decline. So what's on the ballot November 8th are 3 questions. And I'll go through the financial impact, but I certainly don't want to relitigate the entire last 4 years of discussions and processes in the district. Just want to give you an idea of what the board has determined. This is what we need to go to the community for. The first question, $1.7 million, is basically to take us from this to this. So $1.7 million is a $750,000 jump from this year to next year. So when you compare the two, we have heard the question. Last referendum was $950,000. This one's $1.7 million. Boy, that's a big jump. And certainly in isolation it is. Absolutely it is. But as far as the district is concerned, that's a 4% increase in our revenue. Because again, that referendum comes on top of that base level that the state allows us. And if we don't get that, what we're looking at is a 5% drop in our revenue. So this is a 9%, almost 10% difference in the level of funding that we have available as a district. That's what question 1 is about. Now, $1.7 million will buy the district a number of different things. And I want to be clear, all of this takes effect for next school year. So any decisions about how different referenda outcome will affect decision making, one thing to keep in mind is that between no, 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 and yes, 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 there are 8 different places we could be on November 9th. But we think it's important to give folks an example and put that number in context to show what it really means for our programming in our district. So the first thing that we buy for $1.7 million is staff time. Education is a very people-heavy business. So $1.7 million equates to about anywhere between 23 and 30 staff, depending on how you distribute that share between teachers and support staff, administrators, etc. $1.7 million will buy us 70% of what we spend on employee benefits in the district. That amount of money is 3 times what we spend in all of our extracurricular programming. We could cut every sport, we could cut every performance, we could cut every club. And that gets a third of the way to $1.7 million. It's twice what we spend on transportation. Now, as far as you, the community, the homeowner are concerned, what $1.7 million means compared to what we have to what's on the ballot is about $3.50 a week. That's the tax change wrapped up into question 1, comparing the $1.7 million to the $950,000. So that's question 1. Question 2 is that building project Chuck was talking about, $14 million to replace the primary school building with a new building to be located just to the west here, either north of the road or south of the road. That new building will be designed to house about 300 kids. Which specific 300 kids, which specific grades, does that include OSC charter school, does that not include OSC? That is all to be determined. But it will be built for 300 kids, because that's about what we have in the primary school. Replace that building for $14 million, and then to spend the other $8 million on improvements, primarily in the elementary school and in the middle school, a little bit here in the high school, designed to have our other schools better work with the new building, better meet the needs of modern learning